Alrighty, so now we're going to use the HTTP client.
Yep.
I'm excited.
Yeah. All right, so first thing first, little housekeeping. I forgot to delete the token.go from our hands-on exercise stuff. I'm actually going to keep that, though, because it'll be useful in a moment.
Sticking it into the JWT. I'm glad we forgot to delete it.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be helpful momentarily. So, all right, so once you've got an authenticated client, you can now go to whatever website they've got for documentation and look up stuff you can do. So one of the things I generally want to do is figure out who is this GitHub user. I just want like a GitHub user ID or something. So hold on. Building OAuth apps. GitHub API. So I'm authenticated, so now I can make calls to the GitHub API. So I'm authenticated. And now I want to know about a user. They're actually using GraphQL now. How interesting. That's new.
New since we were here. You were here last.
Yes. Another thing you can actually potentially do is for a lot of these websites, they will actually provide a library which deals with all the requests for you. Of course,
this
searching
is a hard
for
one for GitHub. Yeah. You're going to get every single package
in order of most imports. I have no idea what this package is, but apparently it's super highly imported.
Well, maybe just Google it instead of Godocking it, like GitHub.
GitHub Golang. GitHub Golang client.
Your client. You could also do advanced search on a domain. I don't know if that'd work. Do a Godoc domain advanced search.
Well, that's through Google. I'm not sure. But in any case...
Do you need a second to read this through, and then we'll pick it up?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to look through this material here, and then we'll pick it up after this edit right now. Okay, so you figured out a little that OAuth 2 stuff. And,
yeah. Right. So
it was GraphQL.
Yep.
Jinx. All right, so what do we got?
OBS stuff. All right, so need to look up the GitHub API documentation. Just search for it on Google. And so GitHub's got V3 and V4. So in the tradition of always going for the newest stuff, I'm going to pick V4. V3 should still work. V3 uses REST APIs, so you make calls to endpoints to get data. V4 uses GraphQL, and I had to quickly go refresh my memory on how GraphQL worked. So with GraphQL, you need a root endpoint, and so you will make post requests to this endpoint for everything. And so I'm going to take that endpoint, and my client here is authenticated with GitHub as the user through the magic of OAuth, the OAuth library. So I'm going to need to make a post request to this endpoint. So post also requires a content type and a body of the request. So for GraphQL, the content type of your requests is JSON, and then you're going to need your actual request body. So request body, which needs to be a reader. So I'm going to use the strings package. It's got a strings.newReader, which lets you convert any string into a reader. All right, and so now we need to actually make the GraphQL request is in here. So I'm going to use the backticks. So a GraphQL request is JSON. Its query is the key, and the value is basically JSON without with just the keys, and GraphQL will respond with the keys filled out, with the values filled out. So the query I need to make is, if I go back up, generic, it's a query.
What are you looking at on the doc there?
Yeah, I'm just looking at their example here.
Other example, okay.
This is their curl example. So a GraphQL request is a JSON object query is the key. Value is your actual query string. So your query string is basically JSON without the values. So it's query, viewer, login. So we don't want that. We want, so for GitHub, if we look at the, go back, at queries, go all the way to the very bottom, viewer is the currently authenticated user. So we are authenticated as someone. So viewer is who are we authenticated as. So query, viewer, and inside viewer is a user, and so, and user, if I look at fields that users have, there's lots and lots of stuff in here, but it's got an ID, and that's what we want. So there's our GraphQL string. It's a query where we're looking for the viewer, and we want the ID from that viewer. Ugh. So yes, GraphQL is a little crazy if you're not used to it. And I'm not sure why, but whenever I do this particular GraphQL string, it messes up my, my tab thing. It always wants to be one tab over. So I make the post request, and that gives back a response and an error. So check our error. Error. Couldn't get user. hp.status internal server error. Return. Defer response.body.close, because you should always do so whenever you make a request. And now we've got a response. And so I'm going to use in package io/ioutil, there is a function called readAll. This function, this function takes in a reader, and it just gives you back all the bytes from it. So response.body gives you back bytes and an error. And I'm just going to copy paste my error here. Couldn't read GitHub information. And for now, I'm just going to print out the string form of those bytes, because GraphQL returns JSON data. But I'm not 100% sure how that JSON data is structured, so I'm just going to print it out. I need to make sure I import log. So since I'm not exactly sure how it's how that JSON data is formatted, I'm just going to print it out so I can inspect it, so I can figure out how to make the struct that I can JSON unmarshal into. So there is a pattern to it. It matches the query string somehow, but like I'm not as familiar with GraphQL to know that off the top of my head. All right, so making a request with the request body, GraphQL request, we are just looking for the viewer's ID. And so for any other OAuth, generally there'll be like some sort of REST thing where you can make a GET request to like /me, and it'll have the ID in it. Or like here, GraphQL is viewer ID. Facebook uses GraphQL. I believe they invented it, and I believe they call it me. So generally speaking, however you can get the ID of who your client is you want the ID of whoever's you're logged in as. Is what you're looking to get. So now I'm going to run this. So hit login with GitHub. Since I already hit approve, it redirected me back here immediately, and I'm going to look. Oh, I got an error. Query doesn't exist on type query. All right, so I misformatted the. Let's go back. Root endpoint. What's the example look like again?
Maybe just copy that and compare it.
Problem is it's using the underscore stuff, which is a bit of a pain. Or it's using the escape sequences.
Doesn't have that opening curly.
The main opening are on different lines.
Oh, got it.
So oh, but it's right here. Okay. Too many curlies. All right, so let's restart our server. Go back here. Log in. All right, so here's the response back from GitHub. Data, viewer, and this is the ID of my user account, according to GitHub. And so now we can store that in a database somewhere. On this GitHub ID means some ID for users on our own account, on our own website. So if it's the first time we've seen the ID, we can redirect them to a register page and they can type in any extra information like email or something. Or if we don't need any of that, we can just say, we just create a user account for them. If this ID is in our database, then we see what user ID on our system it is, and we log them in with that ID using our token, using our own JWT system, create a session, how we normally would. All right, so that's it for this video. Next video, I'll actually create the struct and decode this and show an example of actually using it a bit.
Quick question. So also if they had an email or a first name, we might be able to ask for that, and then we'd have more information to add to the account.
Yeah, so yeah, if you're using this for creating an account, then potentially there is additional information.
Yeah.
So like, for example, for GitHub, for the user, you could look up, like, they've got the URL of an avatar, so you might pre-fill out their avatar with what their GitHub avatar was. Or they've got the publicly visible profile email, if they've got one. So you could ask for each of these.
Cool. And then GraphQL, Facebook invented that just so that they could be a little bit faster in data retrieval. And so now Twitter's using that. And if we look up GraphQL on Wikipedia, just to kind of get a quick description of it, open source data query manipulation language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling queries in existing data. But that was the reason Facebook created it, right?
It kind of matches the... so with REST, if you want to get if you want to get the avatar pictures of all of a person's friends, you have to make a call to get the person originally, so you can see the list of their friends, and then you have to make a call for each of their friends asking for their information so you can get their avatar pictures to show on the page. With GraphQL, you can make a request, this person, sub-value friends, sub-value picture information.
Interesting.
So it can kind of follow the path, and then so it's one call, and Facebook's GraphQL server can then make those individual calls to servers that have that information and to collect it all together and send it back to the user. So there's less round trips.
Got it. Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Daniel.
It also matches how Facebook stores their data internally fairly well.
Commit the code.
Yeah.
Tag v0.36 0.
Zero 36 0.
Awesome.
All right.
See you in the next video.